Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We are so excited to share the power of healing from complex trauma with all of you. It's inspiring to know that so many of you tune in to learn about the personal and collective healing that can come from resolving complex trauma. We are thrilled to offer the Inner Circle, NARM's online learning community. Each month, members receive direct mentorship from NARM creator Dr. Lawrence Heller, NARM training director Brad Kammer, and other NARM faculty through live webinars. These webinars deconstruct the various elements of complex trauma, including issues related to developmental, relational, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. They will also guide you through a step-by-step process of learning how to integrate NARM into your work by sharing NARM demonstration videos of client sessions and then pulling up the hood to describe how NARM is being used with real clients to resolve complex trauma. The NARM Inner Circle is a great place to start your exploration of NARM. Whether you're a mental health or other helping professional, educator, or just interested in addressing complex trauma, there's a place for you within the Inner Circle community. You, our Transforming Trauma listeners, can receive $100 off your annual membership when using the code TransformingTrauma15 at checkout. Visit narmtraining.com/innercircle to sign up and for more information. Today's interview is with Galina Denzel, a somatic practitioner helping humans to embody their deepest selves while healing through mindful movement and nervous system balancing. Galina is involved in teaching, writing, and other various projects, both in the United States as well as in her home country of Bulgaria. Galina recently published a book titled Peace with Self, Peace with Food, and has generously shared access to a key chapter of the book with Transforming Trauma listeners. The link to receive that chapter is in the show notes. Aside from her tremendous skill as a practitioner, what stood out to me about Galina was her heartfulness and presence. She brings her whole soul to her work and to this conversation. I'm excited to share her insights with you today, so please enjoy this time with Galina Denzel. Okay, we are here with Galina Denzel. Hello, Galina, and welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Hi, Emily. It's so lovely to be here with you.
It's so lovely to have you. And as you might know, we typically start these conversations where I'm just going to ask you, what is it that you would like for our listeners to get out of our conversation today?
I would love for them to have an opportunity to connect with themselves, to find that place in themselves, perhaps that is soft and compassionate and understanding in place of the place that it's typically harsh and puts pressure on them.
Okay.
Is that too much of a therapist agenda?
No, I'm just like it's a little juicy. So I'm just kind of like sinking into that. I'm like, oh, we're going to have an interesting conversation, aren't we? Lovely. Okay. Well, I know a little bit about you and a little bit about your work, but I wonder if you would tell us a little about the work that you're doing.
Well, currently the work that I'm most focused on is working in group and individual format with people who are suffering in their relationship with food. And it wasn't always my plan to do so. I very accidentally came upon doing this work. I came to Somatic Experiencing and subsequently to NARM and somatic practice because I wanted to support my clients who were having chronic pain and complex conditions like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And in the process of that, learning SC and then somatic practice and NARM, found myself free from a lifetime of food suffering. And because my transformation was so profound without having looked for it, I kind of went back and retraced my steps and tried to figure out what did my system go through, both in my training and in my individual experiential practices, that allowed it to feel safe enough to be able to have a different relationship with food and my body image. And so that's how I came to teach what I teach today. Initially, about 6 years ago, I started doing it in retreat format. And little by little, it has changed its form. And now I teach it in a 6-month group format. That's a group and individual hybrid. I also have private other clients that I do other specialized work with, but this is what really lights me up and what I love to write about and what I love to research about and what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I'm in this moment, I'm also just feeling so curious because I know a little bit about what you do, just from reading your work, your content that you've put out and your website. But also I'm curious where you're coming from. Like, where in the world can we locate Galina?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Colorado, in Longmont, Colorado, where incidentally the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute is located as well, which is really fun. I am originally from Bulgaria, which is what you hear perhaps in my accent. And I've been here this week 11 years, which is kind of a big chunk of time.
Yeah, that's a milestone right there, 11 years. So you moved from Bulgaria to Colorado.
Yeah, I moved from Bulgaria to Southern California. My husband is from Southern California, and we met years ago and had a book idea together. And I came out here to draft the book with him, and we fell in love. And so I ended up moving here.
And listeners can't see your face. I can see your face, but you just lit up just now when you said that. I love that. So you're working with your partner in life as well.
Yep. It's been a wonderful journey of being co-authors and writing, and now having his support in putting my recent book, which is about the work that I do in the world and kind of giving it a body, which has been beautiful.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that. We're going to save that for a little bit down the road, but I can't wait to talk about that too. So you told us just a little bit. I feel like we got a little taste of what led you to doing the work that you're doing, but I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
I would be happy to. But what was really hard for me in all the years of struggling with food, both kind of having this preoccupation with food, which probably if somebody wanted to diagnose would probably call orthorexia, and preoccupation with also the health quality of food as a way to have some sense of control in my life, some sense of meaning and some sense of purpose. All these years that I suffered, and my suffering started kind of at birth because I could not breastfeed. I was one of those babies that had a tongue tie, could not latch on. And I grew up in a space that had a very antiquated medical system that couldn't equip my parents with what they needed to support me. So I had a very, very distressing kind of entry into the world around food. My parents tell this story about how I was eating the wall next to my crib. I had pica. And so I just always think about like a tiny baby with its tiny hands, going for the wall because of whether it was a deficiency or it was just trying to get some nourishment or some touch and some contact. And so when people go, well, when did your eating disorder start? I'm like, at birth, pretty much. Yeah. But more consciously, I really struggled with food and what was allowed and what was not allowed because I was a classical dancer. And so it's not an exotic story. Like I don't hold the patent on being a dancer or a gymnast or a competitive athlete and having a disordered relationship with food. But what was really shocking to me is that I was aware that I had an issue with food very, very early on and started in my late teens and early 20s trying to help myself. And so I recruited all the knowledge and all the support and all the experts that I could to help me, and including wonderful psychotherapy that helped me so much in other areas of my life, but unfortunately could not touch my fear of food, the preoccupation with thinking about food all the time, and constantly kind of seeing my body as an object. I could not land in my body and have an experience inside my body. All of my experiences with my body were very objective. There was no subjective experience. And now looking back, that makes a lot of sense because of the early shock and developmental traumas that I had, but no one was really holding this in a large context. And you can only try to help yourself with the tools that you know exist. And so I worked really, really hard for many, many years, trying both with nutrition and Chinese medicine and acupuncture and physical therapy and all sorts of modalities, including therapy, to help myself, and nothing budged it. And I felt like such a hypocrite as well, because I don't know if some of our listeners and colleagues will relate to this when you're personally struggling with something that you're trying to help other people with. Because I went, because of my personal struggles, I went into health coaching to try to figure out, hey, if I get all the education, then if I can help other people, maybe I can also help myself. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't. I was able to help others to a degree, but I wasn't able to touch this really deep-seated distress around food and feeding. And so, to my surprise, I shared earlier that I moved to the States 11 years ago. I was 31 when I moved. When I moved here, I kind of gave up. I said, you know what? I've been trying a long enough time. And I was working with so many people with chronic issues at the time, people who were in debilitating chronic pain, people who I was just helping manage life. I was like, hey, I have all these brave clients who are so amazing at just living with their conditions. Maybe I can live with this too. Maybe I can be rooted deeply in my spirit, be rooted deeply in the meaningfulness of my work, and love this wonderful man that I moved here for, and enjoy this new space, and take lots of walks by the beach. And maybe I can create enough of a life around this dysfunction that it will not, take over my whole existence. And so, to my surprise, toward the end of my second year of SE training, I was in a cohort with Abby Blakesley at the time. I remember standing, looking in the mirror on the second floor in our tiny Orange County townhome. And for the first time, I was looking in the mirror and I was not seeing parts. I was not seeing, here's an arm, and here's a leg, and here's a belly, and here's my thighs. Or I was not looking from that survival adaptation space that was always looking for what's wrong and what's there to fix. And somehow I was looking from inside my body through these eyes that I could see in the mirror. Someone, that was me, was looking out through my eyes instead of looking at me. And it was such a shocking experience. And I have a good reason to have lived dissociated most of my life, growing up the way that I did in very complex sociopolitical climate, growing up in communism, growing up with medical challenges, growing up in a family that had its own issues. And we can talk about those if you're curious. But this moment of like, my body is a safe space and I can be safe inside my body and I'm safe with me. That was the first moment I had ever felt that. And somehow it was kind of like a realization that together with that, I also had stopped worrying about what I'm eating or what I should be eating or how much I'm eating. And it kind of sounds miraculous, but I think the realization is what felt miraculous. I think the process had happened for a long time, but I just wasn't focused on looking there. And so then the way my brain works is I love teaching. I've always loved teaching. I went to university to be an English teacher. I wanted to teach. I loved English more than anything. And I'm so glad because I love writing. And I had a great time at university writing and researching and doing literature and linguistics. And it was beautiful. But I've always had this thing in me, if something is interesting for me, I want to teach it. And I just cannot stop myself. And so I said, well, here's this thing. What if I could take these tools that I think helped me and see if they can help others too? And so I recruited 7 wonderful women and we went deep in the mountains with no cell service for a week. And they knew they were coming with me to try if what worked for me is going to work for them. And I'm like this newbie. I was between my second and third year of SE, no NARM on board yet, none of the things that I do today that are so complex. And even with how little I had in the beginning, the transformation they went through was profound. And it was enough to give me courage to continue and to continue teaching in retreat formats and then little by little develop what I do today. And what I see over and over and over again when I do my consultations with people and people who want to be my students is how tired everyone is of trying to help themselves and not being helpful. How exhausting it is when help isn't helpful, and how few people realize that there's a biological foundation under our struggles. And unless that biological foundation is addressed and our nervous system processes are addressed, everything else we do is just going to roll like water off a duck and it's very, very complex. And that's also why eating disorders are so complex, as are all addictions.
Yeah. You said so much there that is really, I'm like kind of marinating in it for a second. This piece of when help isn't helpful, I so resonate with that. Like I feel like we're all kind of swimming in that. And I see that in so many faces is that, as we scroll social media and everyone's trying to looking for answers and everyone's tired.
Mm.
And so what I'm really witnessing as you're sharing about your work, and again, listeners can't see your face, but I'm just seeing you light up as you talk about it, and you're bringing your heartfulness. And so I love witnessing that. So I'm happy we're having this conversation.
Mm.
So you went deep in the mountains and it gave you courage to continue working and finding ways to navigate supporting others. I'm curious what came next.
Yeah. So what came next is I finished my third year of somatic experiencing. And at the last day of advanced, I had a dream. And Raja Selvam showed up. For those of you who are colleagues, you know who Raja is, with a sheet of paper that said, "Here's your letter. You need to go do NARM next." Literally. Like that happened in a dream.
Whoa.
So it was just,
Whoa.
I know. And I was just starting my second year with Steve Terrell and Kathy Kane, learning touch and somatic resiliency and regulation, and just came and started NARM. And once NARM came into the picture and I could understand how shock and developmental trauma intersected, I felt like for the first time I had a full picture.
Yeah.
Because yes, shock trauma matters. Like for me, it was monumentally important to work through my birth trauma and my in utero trauma, to work through early hospitalizations and medical traumas, several concussions, and the ancestral traumas of having political prisoners and refugees. I'm second generation in my lineage, which was really, really heavy and hard in my system. But the relational piece and the early survival strategies that I had to develop in order to navigate my family of origin dynamics and to come out whole on the other side and not fully fragmented, those were what was really, really crucial. I feel like in fully and forever kind of finishing the struggle with food and body image. The shock trauma pieces were like the big logs. Like if you look at a beaver dam, those were the really big logs, but there were also all these littler accumulated small T's and smaller sticks that were all stuck in there and needed to be moved. Because while, a shock trauma might show up as in, certain behaviors of avoidance or certain aches and pains that you might have in your body, the relational developmental pieces were showing up every day. They were showing up in how I was working with my clients, how I was putting pressure on myself. They were showing up in how I was relating to my spouse and enabling their strategies to be strong. Mm-hmm. And so it was so beautiful for me to have the whole picture of like, okay, if I'm going to support somebody to move through their challenges with food, we're not going to only include working with nervous system regulation and the biological foundations of safety, but we're also going to have to work on the relational foundations of safety. And that is ultimately restoring a connection with yourself that you might have had to give up very, very early. And so this kind of self-return that is so, so important, which is essentially kind of us being called by our becoming, it is so important and so crucial because we do lose ourselves in adapting to the difficult circumstances of our lives. And it is heartbreaking to work with somebody. I have so many students in their 70s. I love them. I love working with people who have so much wisdom, but also it is so heartbreaking to hold the grief of, oh my God, I missed. I've been throwing up for 70 years. Yeah. It is just heartbreaking to see how much life we've missed because of being focused on something that is not even real, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. It's inspiring, like you said, to watch someone in their later years still have that desire to continue growing, and then also the grief that comes up. That's really tender. I'm curious. So you moved into your NARM training. I'm curious what happened there and what you'd like to share about that process. I mean, you shared a little bit about how it's affected you, but wondered what else you'd like to share.
I want to say that moving into my NARM training fully changed how I work with people and completely freed me from having any sort of an idea that I know anything about what's best. What's best for the clients and students that look for my support. And it gave me this deep respect for the path that everyone is on, and that they do have the choice or the agency to navigate that path in a way that is right for them. And so if they have come and they have searched for my support, looked for my support, then the best way I can be supportive is by leaving plenty of space for them to discover what maybe they had never been in touch with. Mm-hmm. And so I find it so beautiful that if we want to talk about post-traumatic growth, I don't think it's possible to talk about it without including the NARM process as a really beautiful vehicle for that. And what happened in my work is that I was able to include the early relational pieces and these adaptations into really understanding why people struggle with food so much. Because we don't have two nervous systems, right? We don't have one nervous system for shock experiences and for things that were physiologically overwhelming and for things that were relationally overwhelming. My nervous system cannot make a difference between, running away from a hurricane or from an earthquake or from the wild forest fires that we have here, and running away or not being able to run away from a parent or from a partner, and how confusing that is physically. And so when we come in somatic experiencing and we track the body, how we don't come into a territory that is all flowers and unicorns and bliss and beauty. It is full of discomfort. And it was so important for me to have a way to work top down as well, because the body sometimes is so overwhelmed. And sometimes as we untangle things top down and we understand how we're holding these survival accommodations in our bodies, the body can start to soften and relax. It becomes a little easier to work bottom up as well. And I think something that I do that I don't know many people who are aware of, because I came into somatic experiencing and NARM from body work. I didn't come from psychotherapy.
Oh, okay.
I came from a space where I was already working with the body, and I was working with restoring normal movement from a developmental perspective, where we take somebody through movement sequences where they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months old. So I already knew how to work with the developmental sequencing of movement and support my clients there. But I also knew how many people have dysfunctional breathing patterns or dysfunctional movement patterns that are actually inhibiting their healing process, whether we go into it from an SE or NARM perspective, because the physiology is adapted to being in a particular state because of being in that state for such a long time. And our bodies are very efficient. If you're used to being a mouth breather, you're going to stay a mouth breather until you retrain yourself. If you're mouth breathing, you're going to have tons of anxiety. And your 1 hour of whatever beautiful therapy you do a week is not going to cut it. So we need to go in and establish certain biological normals in order to feel safe from the perspective of things like gas exchanges, CO2 and oxygen, and particular tensions that we hold in our bodies, and the way we hold our bodies up. Like, can I even hold my body upright? Or is my body fully collapsed and my diaphragm can't even expand? So something that I was really aware of early on is, if I'm going to do this work to support people with IC and with NARM and through touch with somatic practice work, I'm also going to need to teach them how to restore some functions that they might have lost because of trauma. And that's why I do a lot of cranial nerve integration work that is essentially education work that people pick up and do on their own. And so unless we have these foundations of tissue quality and the way that we breathe and the way that we hold ourselves in space, it's hard to do the other work because it's kind of going uphill.
Yeah.
It's very multi-dimensional, and it's kind of like a tensegrity model. Everything's connected and you pull one thing and everything else goes with it.
Right. So I'm really curious in this moment. I'm thinking about what everyone's been through the last few years.
And I don't know much about your offerings, and I'm assuming you're working online. Is that an assumption that's correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where my curiosity is going. Number one, how you're weaving SE and NARM and this, I don't know if you said was it cranial sacral or what other works you're doing? And then the movement patterns, like I'm so curious how you're weaving it all together. And I know obviously you can't tell us all of it here in this interview, but I'm curious if you can just share with us a little bit, maybe some important points that have felt important for you as you've weaved those things together.
Absolutely. So I closed my in-person practice a year before COVID and moved everything online. One of my values is freedom, and I wanted to be able to travel and teach from anywhere in the world, especially going back and teaching back in Europe and wanting to still stay connected with my homeland. And so that was really a beautiful move, and it was really, really important. What I was really sad to lose was the touch piece, because I loved doing touch work and really, really enjoyed hours and hours and hours of days sitting in co-regulating space, holding people's kidneys and brain stems and hearts and stomachs and spleens. And that was beautiful. And for those of you who have not experienced touch work, it's really beautiful work that what Kathy Kane and Steve Trell have developed. And so then the question was, how do I teach people to do that on their own? How do I teach them to do it on their own? And one thing that I've always done as a body worker and movement professional was to always teach people. I was always there to teach. I was never there to do for. So I already had this mindset of, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do this. So we're going to take 2 water bottles. We're going to fill them with warm water, and we're going to put them on the bed, and you're going to lay on top of them, and you're going to feel your kidneys being supported by this warm water that moves. Or we're going to use your hands on your body with a particular intention. We're going to do some toning. We're going to send some sound there. Let's see what shifts. So the way that I do that in both group and individual work is just through teaching. We use tools. We use things like massage balls and vibrating massagers and different colorful pictures for focal points. And there's a particular way to do organization of cranial nerves that is done through stimulation. So you can do particular movements of the lips and the tongue and the palate and the throat, and you can stimulate the face and touch the face in particular ways. And I really, really love that. And that's easy to incorporate and to teach online. And it's really easy to teach somebody how to do self-massage with a soft ball and massage the pathway of the vagus nerve. I've also been very, very blessed to have incredible professionals around me who create custom content for my students. So somebody who is incredibly skilled at cranial nerve palpation just created a beautiful workshop for my students where they can learn how to palpate their own nerves and how to create particular patterns and synchronize vagus and trigeminal. And it's just beautiful. I have somebody who's a choreographer who created a 5 rhythms practice specifically for my students to move their nervous systems through different states. And somebody just came and did a vocal workshop for singing. So it's not just me, but I also have these beautiful people around me who can come and who can teach particular skills. And all we do is we ask the body a question and we see how the body responds. And once people can feel that they can have a relationship with their physiology where they're not scared of their bodies, because the autonomic system is autonomic. It's going to do its thing, and then it can scare you and you can spiral, or you can come into a relationship with what your autonomic nervous system is doing, and you can support it, knowing where it is and what it needs. So if you're more frozen or, fawning and collapsing, or if you are more charged and fight or flight, you know exactly what to do with your system and what your system needs. And what a beautiful gift to not be scared of your own system and how it's trying to protect you. So I do a lot of psychoeducation, I do a lot of teaching, and we do a lot of doing.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. You're speaking my language.
Yes. There's a lot of doing because I want people, the reality is 6 months is not enough time. That's the average time that people come into a program with me. And they can stay. I have a membership after that they can stay for the rest of their life if they want to continue learning. But the reality is most people want to say, okay, I'm going to give this 6 months and just see what happens. And the reality is 6 months is enough to learn how to support yourself. It might not be enough for you to be fully free from what you're struggling with. And I think that's normal. If you've been in it 40, 50, 60, 70 years, getting the right tools so you can support yourself is perfect in that time frame. And then you can keep going, because what has really changed is how you are with yourself. Once you change how you are with yourself, that is permanent. That shifting from being object to being subject, that shift from there's something wrong to everything's okay. That shift from I feel deep shame, I feel deeply flawed for how my system's responding, to my system's responding the exact way that it's supposed to. Maybe it's not responding to what's here now. Maybe it's responding to something from 30 years ago, but I am not overreacting. I'm reacting to something that's not here. Understanding all of this is so, so important. It becomes at some point a soul path or a spiritual path as well, because it's a deep dedication to self and a dedication to be on your own behalf.
Beautiful. One of the many things that you said that really jumped out at me is this idea or this truth of coming to this work and learning the skills and then supporting ourselves with it. Like that feels, the agency there feels so important. And I can just imagine all of your students as they're, benefiting from the work that you're doing, how that piece, like it's so much richer because you're giving them the tools for them to support themselves than if they were to just come into your space, which I'm sure the touch work is beautiful. And, in any kind of healing situation where someone lays there and they're kind of acted upon, is that one way to say it? It's not the same as when you're doing for yourself. That is so beautiful to me. And I really appreciate that that's what you're bringing into the world with your work.
Yeah, I think it is so beautiful. I think also we can appreciate our hands are shaped in a way that fits our body perfectly. So if you're teaching somebody how to, touch certain places on their face or the back of their head or their kidneys or their womb or their liver, or even if there's lots of sound that we use to support the organs. If you're making sounds for the particular organs that, like, oh my God, how beautiful it is that I can make a sound and my liver is going to call back to me. That in itself, because so much of our disordered relationship with food is a disordered relationship with our interoceptive system. Our interoceptive system has been overwhelmed by a traumatic memory that gets stored, right, in this eternal present of sensation and emotion that gets so overwhelming that it touches and awakens young parts of us, and then we just feel so out of control. Where the reality is that our interoceptive system, once we have touched into it and we have entered the body from a place of safety and trust and pleasure, and we know that there are these feedback loops that we can pick up the phone and someone's going to pick up on the other end. It's such a beautiful experience. And it is essentially a reclaiming of trust, because so many people feel betrayed. Yeah. They have this experience or this perception that the body has betrayed them. Yeah. Like we are so separated from our body that's like, oh, you betrayed me. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you are the soma. There is no other you to be in this incarnation. And so I find that it's just so beautiful that once we start to connect with ourselves through certain practices and certain tools, we can really restore our interoceptive system to be a system of safety and internal navigation, instead of like, oh, well, just trust your body. Like I did this workshop last year called How to Listen to Your Body. And it's just so ridiculous that there's all these practitioners out there who are like, well, just trust your gut. It's like, what do you want me to trust? There's information there that's screaming at me about terror from 40 years ago. None of that is happening right now. So how can I go in there and I can trust, because the information I'm getting is not correct to what's happening around me? And so until people understand that hunger, satiety, arousal, thirst are homeostatic emotions that are signaled by the same systems as anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, loneliness, anger, how are we not going to be confused in our relationship with food when the same system that should tell us what and how much and when to eat is screaming about what happened when I was 5?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really powerful to think about. And I know that there are so many in the world, and probably a lot of listeners too, that that's going to really land for them, because I know it's landing for me.
Mm,
I'm in this work. It's not like this is all totally new to me, but what you said, trust the body. I mean, there have been times where my body has spoken to me, and that was the message I needed to hear in that moment. But also, this other piece is true where you're saying, I'm getting messages from 4 years old, and that's not in the here and now.
mhm.
Like, it's showing up for me in the here and now, but that's not happening right now. And I so appreciate that reminder. I know that so many of us are in need of that work.
Yeah, I believe that. And interoceptive work is so beautiful. And recovering our connection with our sensory system is so, so important, but also with our proprioceptive system and our vestibular system and all the five senses, all the basic stuff that we do in somatic experiencing. And when people work with body image, for example, it is so complex because in order to have a disordered body image, that means that or your interoceptive, proprioceptive, and vestibular systems, all three of them are off. So tell me how reading inspirational messages on Instagram is going to fix
Right.
that.
Right.
And I have deep respect for the health at every size movement and the body positive movement. But I think so much is being missed in the fact that both shock and developmental trauma, they take those systems offline. Or maybe a more accurate way to say it is that those systems are like a train on a train track, and the train is off the tracks. And so you can paint the train whatever color you want, but it's off the tracks. And the experience internally is that the train is off the tracks. And so until we can bring sensation back into the body, interoception back into the body, interoceptive experience is a positive experience. And then when it's an unpleasant experience, we have tolerance to it. We have capacity to tolerate it, which is people are now loving doing ice baths and all of that. That's one way to, our culture takes one extreme of it and works on it that way. But it can also be, just holding your glass of water and feeling its temperature. Like you don't need to go in an ice bath to get that system back. We're so addicted to intensity. Our culture is addicted to intensity, and it doesn't understand that it blows up our vessels, and then it's hard to contain and to maintain the quote unquote results that we want to have. And if we can restore that system, if we can restore proprioception, if we can restore our vestibular system and our movement, and we can come back into connection with nature, with the ground, with ourselves, with other beings who are also moving and breathing and are like us, it can be so helpful to our body image. And it can, in a way, save us all the cognitive and thinking work of having to read all the books about how bad the media is and how bad all of the things are. Because when you have a sense of goodness inside yourself and you feel connected to yourself and to nature, culture, the way that is around you, it's a much more minor influence because you are so much yourself, and you are, to use the term bodyful, having this bodyful instead of mindful bodyful experience in the world. It's such a rich experience. And so so much about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And it's hard to be told what's right because
Yeah. Mm. So I wondered if you have any specific stories about, any struggle or inspiration, any of your clients that you would feel comfortable or feel good about sharing with our listeners, because I'm getting a sense of the work that you're doing. And I would just love to hear if there's anything specific that you would be able to share in that way.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of somebody that I just worked with yesterday who's very fresh in my mind. And that's somebody who's had a dance background, like I have, and who was from a very young age objectified, and who from a very young age has struggled with both her body image and food, what is allowed, what's not allowed. As we have been working, what became very clear is that there's been some family dynamics, both with her parents and her siblings, that had really brought her system to where she constantly lived either in a state of fear or in a state of collapse and freeze and fawn around both parents and the siblings, where if they needed something or wanted something or something was important for them, she was expected to show up. So no sense of agency whatsoever in these relationships. And we've mostly done boundary work and healthy aggression work. Mm-hmm. We've done boundary work with movement. We've done boundary work with statements, with visualizations, with art. And we've done healthy aggression work, lots of it with sound, or with pushing, with vocalization. And that's not me being in the room with her. That's her pushing into the ground or pushing into a wall or learning how to say no, and then working with the somatic resonance of that. And in the beginning, it was we had to work in such tiny, tiny pieces, because even saying no, like, can I borrow your stapler, was like impossible. Like even like a little no. And it was really incredible to track both the ways that her system was collapsing around the needs of others around her and how she had no space for herself. I often speak to my students about how much real estate do other people take in your body. All the real estate in her body was other people, her mother, her father, her siblings. And she had grown up with one sibling who had special needs. So that was exceptionally hard. And so it's been amazing to see in that process that she's been able to navigate medical challenges with incredible grace. She's been able to navigate work changes with incredible grace. She's been able to put very, very healthy and great boundaries with both her parents. And she's had a huge change, which we didn't work directly with, on the kinds of clothes she can wear. We absolutely did not do any body image work whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Zero. And now she's like, I can wear all these clothes I was never able to wear before. Yeah. It's not like she's lost 50 pounds or something while we're working. We've only been together for 5 months. Mm. I'm sharing this because people imagine when they're struggling with food that they need to do something with the food. Mm-hmm. You don't need to do anything with the food. Now, if you're eating erratically and you're having nutrient deficiencies, of course, you need to organize your food, because lack of food is a massive stressor to the body, as is overeating inappropriate foods can be a massive stressor to the body. So, of course, if things are erratic there, you might need some consultations and help with that. And I refer out for that. Mm-hmm. But that's not what we did with her. We worked with the collapse. We worked with lack of access to her healthy aggression. We worked with boundaries. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I can wear all these clothes. It is shocking. It is shocking what happens to people. And this is a very mild, like I was just thinking about her because we just worked yesterday. And it looks like a very mild thing. Like, oh, I'm not talking about somebody who was hospitalized every month. And at the same time, this person's whole life is different. Different, yeah. Her whole life is different. I have some student interviews on my website. So if people are interested, they can sit down and just listen and hear what people go through. But it's incredible to see how much freeze and collapse people walk around with, highly functional people that override it, and how much that is at the base of a lot of issues with food. I'm also remembering somebody I worked with yesterday too, who's just lost quite a bit of weight. And when people come to me, I tell them, I don't know what's going to happen to your weight. We don't know, because this is not a weight loss program. This is a nervous system regulation.
That's not a goal.
Space. Yeah. That's not a goal. We're not goal oriented. We set intentions for how you want to feel. We're very serious in the beginning of the program about setting individually intentions and then looking for the resonance in the body for whether your body's okay with that or not, and whether resistance comes up in the relationship. And we're very clear about our intentions, but that's not a goal. And I was just working with somebody yesterday who's just lost a ton of weight, and we're just reflecting on it, how we hadn't expected that. And what was really interesting for her is we recognized in our work that every time she had lost weight before, as soon as she lost it, she would deny herself access to support. So it was like, well, what if you could continue getting support even after you lose it? Well, why would I do that? Well, because you still need it. It was this idea of like, I'm going to do it alone. I think so much, both in SC and NARM, we see people who come to us and whose systems are just cooked from trying to do it all alone, which is often a survival adaptation. And how often we are not ready to walk alone in the world. Even as adults, If your weight loss is 2 months old, you're a 2-month old walking the world. And you still need support. You can be a 60-year-old 2-month old, and you need support to walk the world. That was such a foundational shift for her that it changed everything. She's like, I think I can do this now. I can just keep going. And sometimes it's that piece around agency of, are we going back into child consciousness with our process, or are we staying in adult consciousness? And how beautiful it is for us as helpers and practitioners to be able to, loan some of that, when the person is in between the two ways of thinking, and go, well, what would it be like if you did it this way? Oh, I don't know. I've never thought I could get more support.
The curiosity.
You totally can. I mean, that's what groups are for. That's what coaches are for. That's why there's a whole industry out there of helpers. But to give yourself the permission and to move through these self-identifications, right, around like expectations and pressure and guilt and shame, that you should be able to do it on your own. That's everything. And NARM is such a gift in exploring that so respectfully, without in any way making people wrong for how they've had to adapt.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Right now, I just keep thinking as you're talking, for me, what feels true is, well, if I were to walk into your studio or enter your group, I would feel like she's helping me, she's supporting me to support myself, and your support is available. Like, it just feels like this really beautiful, it's both, it's the both and. I can support myself, and I can get the tools to really be with myself. And whenever I need it, you're there, and I can turn to that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And not just to me, but also to peers, right? And to other people who are in the group, who are walking together, who are walking a similar path. And I can tell you, one of the most beautiful things, I love teaching about boundaries so much, and embodied bodyful boundaries, because no one ever taught me. And I walk around the world like a live wire, my whole life, trying to ground myself in the approval of other people. And it's been so beautiful to watch them when we work, and I work in small groups. I work in 4 to 6 people. They're small, very intimate groups. And to watch when somebody affirms a boundary, to watch others celebrate that. And what a different experience it is, because out in the real world, when you put a boundary, people aren't like, oh, wow, thank you for the boundary.
They're going to push against it.
People are going to push against it. People are going to get upset. And yet our systems long for being seen, being validated, being believed, and being respected. And maybe the only relational laboratory, and I tell people, when you come in, you donate your nervous systems to each other. It's like people donate blood. This is a life-saving thing that you're doing for each other in this small space here. And what a beautiful thing. You might never have the chance to experience several people cheering your boundary, because this just doesn't come up in life. Yeah. People are going to get upset, or like one person will cheer and 3 will get upset, and 1 will push back, and 1 will freeze you out, 1 will ghost you, whatever. There'll be some consequence.
Yeah.
And here it's like, oh, and it's not about like, well, but that's not real life. Yes, it is real life, because it just happened and your nervous system is having a reparative experience. Just like when you're working with a visualization, or, we work with, I don't know if you're familiar with the ideal parent figure protocol, which is so beautiful. If you're working with IPF, it's like those parents don't exist. And yet 2 years into working with IPF, my attachment system is completely stable. I feel securely attached and I don't get triggered. Very interesting.
Yeah. What's more real than that?
What's more real than that? That my imaginary parents helped me repair my attachment system. Yeah. It's like, that's incredible that our brains work that way. Mm-hmm. Why not lean into it? Yeah. Instead of being alone and sulking that nothing helps.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Wow, this has been so lovely to hear from you. I'm just really enjoying all that you're bringing to the table, and to the work that you're bringing into the world. And I'm really excited to hear a little bit, if you could tell us a little bit about your book, and you've got groups, and what can you share with us in terms of the work that you're putting out, and then also how can people find you?
Yeah, I would love to do that. Your book is in the mail, should be with you in a couple of days.
I'm so excited.
Yay. And this is going to air after the book comes out. The book comes out February 14th.
Wonderful.
It was going to be an easy book birthday to remember for me.
I love it.
Then it will be on my website on purebelonging.com or on Amazon or everywhere where people buy their digital books and their paper books as well. And the book started as I wanted to write something for my students who are just starting this journey, who have never considered that their nervous system and their eating behaviors are related, who have never considered how food can bring you into a regulation, be it a fall regulation, doesn't matter. And because you cannot stay in hyper or hypoarousal. These are not sustainable, biologically sustainable states.
Right.
And so people who haven't considered that at all, who don't understand how autonomics work, I wanted to create a book for them to explain very simply how it works, but also to give them tools. And so the book has some explanation in the beginning about how food behaviors, early developmental ruptures, and the nervous system are related. And then we go into 7 steps of moving through the different foundations of how I find our food relationship can be healed and changed. Those practices are also recorded. So there are audios and videos on my website if people want to follow along and they would rather not be learning from a book. If people want more, some people might be just very happy with just the book, and that's wonderful. That would make me very, very happy. But if people want more, I teach workshops monthly that are on my website, and I also teach these 6-month groups that one starts almost every month.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And all of that is on purebelonging.com. And, I always encourage people, I offer a free clarity call for people who are interested in going deeper. I always encourage people to come on that call, because even if we're not a good fit, because I don't invite everyone into a group, my curriculum is set and I know what I'm teaching. And if people don't need what I teach, if they need something else, that's what I'm going to recommend. But what's really beautiful in that call is that people get to know themselves. They can really understand the patterns that are driving their food behaviors. They can put things in context. So it's not, does this refer to me? Am I in hyperarousal? Am I hypo? Am I running both systems at the same time? What's happening when I go to food? Which systems need to be supported? And sometimes I'll see people for a consultation and then I'll refer them out to a colleague, or I'll refer them out for body work, or they have some medical work to do that's not with me at all because that's not my scope. And then some people are a fantastic fit for my group. And if they are, then I invite them in and we do some deep work together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, and your heart. More importantly, your heart, because I really, really felt that as you shared your work. And I'm excited for our listeners to be in touch with you and follow along.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate people reaching out and asking questions, and I look forward to hearing from them. And thank you for being such a generous host.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Are you interested in deepening your understanding of NARM? We're thrilled to offer the Inner Circle, NARM's online learning community. Each month, members receive direct mentorship from NARM creator Dr. Lawrence Heller, NARM training director Brad Kammer, and other NARM faculty through live webinars. The Inner Circle is also a hub for the international NARM community, where people working with complex trauma from around the world come together to connect, network, and develop trauma-informed projects to benefit our world. Visit narmtraining.com/innercircle to sign up and for more information. Our Transforming Trauma listeners can receive $100 off your annual membership when using the code TransformingTrauma15 at checkout. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.